People go missing every day. It's an all too common occurrence. Sometimes the lost are thankfully found safe. In less fortunate times, only what remains of them is. And then there are the times that no one and nothing is found at all. The lingering mystery that supplants both the legacy of the disappeared and the closure of loved ones. Situations that leave both hope and hopelessness in play. Hey guys, welcome back. Today's video is about Jean Spangler, a young aspiring actress who was working in cinema only to disappear under very mysterious circumstances. People have been debating and trying to explain her untimely disappearance for over 70 years. But still, here we are again today discussing it. The 1940s will forever be remembered as a time of war, a time of unforgettable tragedy and unbelievable triumph. But the decade saw even more than that. Maybe less important, but probably just as dramatic, cinema saw itself rapidly expanding, and there were plenty of stars that America and the world could fall in love with. But there's one name, well actually a few, from 1940s film that still stands out, but not for her filmography, instead her rather strange vanishing. Up-and-coming actress Jean Spangler would seemingly disappear off the face of the earth in 1949, leaving behind only a small handful of clues, but one of the biggest mysteries to hit the film industry, and route a Los Angeles similar to how the infamous Black Dahlia had years before, but yet go much more under the radar over the decades. But before we get into that, let's look at the early life of Jean Spangler. Born in 1923 in Seattle, Jean would go on to graduate from a high school in Los Angeles. Following that, Jean worked as a model and also a dancer in Hollywood. Jean had a reputation for being a bit wild and as a party girl, but in 1942 she would marry Dexter Benner, a plastics manufacturer. Then they filed for divorce 6 months later. Still, they maintained a relationship, and 2 years later their daughter Christine would be born. 2 years after that, Jean Spangler and Dexter Benner would finalize their divorce. Benner said she partied too much, and Jean said he was abusive. A nasty custody battle ensued, and Jean would win. It was around this time that Jean Spangler began working as a movie actress, with small roles as extras, mainly playing dancers and background characters. Still, Jean was a young and pretty actress, hoping to make a name for herself. She seemed to find consistent, albeit minor work in films. She never had any major roles and really only worked as an extra, but was working her way up. The hope was always to have that big breakout role. She would only have a couple of years of acting under her belt, so it's impossible to tell what she would have become. She may have had her big breakthrough, or she may have faded into obscurity. Still, in an unfortunate turn of events, Jean Spangler's name would go down in history, just not for the reasons she would have wanted. Let's fast forward to October 1949. Jean, now 26 years old, resides with her mother and 5-year-old daughter Christine, as well as her brother and sister-in-law Sophie, in Los Angeles. Jean had recently worked as an extra on the film Young Man with a Horn, starring legendary actor Kirk Douglas. That name probably sounds familiar, as Kirk Douglas was one of the most sought-after actors in the second half of the 20th century. He had numerous lead roles in some of the biggest films of the time. The late Douglas actually lived to be 103 years old, dying recently in February of 2020. Like damn, this guy lived to be over a century old. While he would go on to be one of the biggest names in Hollywood, in 1949, he was still only a star in the making. On October 7th, 1949, Jean would leave her home, alone around 5 p.m. She said she needed to meet with ex-husband Benner to discuss late child support payments, and then afterwards, she would go to shoot some night footage for the current film she was in. About 2 hours after leaving, she called home to talk to her daughter and her sister-in-law Sophie. Sophie was watching Christine as her mother was out of town. Jean calling her daughter in the evening was nothing unusual, but it would be the last time she spoke with her. She told them that she'd be working a full 8 hours that night and wouldn't be coming home that evening. It was normal for Jean to be out late. She seemed to enjoy the socialite lifestyle of hitting LA's bars and nightclubs, and meeting new people, but when she didn't return the following day on October 8th, 1949, a worried Sophie would go to the police station, and a missing persons case would then be filed, as Jean's story seemingly fell apart. When questioned, ex-husband Benner said she had not stopped by that night, and in fact, he hadn't seen her for weeks. His new wife supported his story. Furthermore, when police contacted the film's production, it was discovered that she was not scheduled to work on a film that night. Still, apparently it wasn't completely unusual for Jean to lie about her whereabouts during the night. Upon further investigation, a grocery store employee a few blocks from Jean's home claimed to have seen Jean browsing the store at 6 p.m., and appeared to be waiting for someone. The next day, on October 9th, 1949, the only clues to this case would be discovered, adding further mystery to the situation. Jean's purse was discovered in Los Angeles' Griffith Park, over 5 miles from her home. The straps on the purse were torn loose on one side, as if it had been ripped away from her. However, inside the purse, the strangest piece of evidence would be found. A note that read, "Kirk, can't wait any longer. Going to see Dr. Scott. It will work best this way, while Mother is away." Some claim that since the note was unsigned, it was unfinished, or written by another's hand. Nothing else of importance was discovered in the bag. No money was there either, although Sophie said that Jean had left home with no money. Police even searched the entire park, but discovered nothing else. The only thing that LAPD had to go on was a note with 2 names. This investigation was actually led by Detective Thad Brown, the same who headed the infamous Black Dahlia case in LA just a couple years before, which the media was quick to connect this case to. Police never found a Dr. Scott that had Jean listed as a patient. The only other potential Scott was a man with whom Jean had been involved with, an abusive man by the name of Scotty, a former Air Corps lieutenant who she had had an affair with years ago during her marriage. Apparently, he had threatened to kill her at one point. However, according to her lawyer, she hadn't seen him in years. Thus, detectives quickly dismissed him. What about Kirk, the name the note was addressed to? Well, I'm pretty sure you've already guessed this one. Kirk Douglas is often brought up in this case, and ties into one of the major theories that we'll be getting into. As I mentioned earlier, Jean had previously worked as an extra in a film that starred Douglas. Furthermore, upon returning, her mother said that a man named Kirk picked Jean up in his car but never came inside, so the family had never met or seen him. It's impossible to tell if this is Douglas or another Kirk. We at least know that Jean was seeing someone, as she had told her friend and fellow actor Robert Cummings that she was involved with someone, although she would not give him an identity. Cummings stated that when he asked her if the relationship was serious, Jean said, "Not really, but I'm having the time of my life." This was presumably the note's Kirk, or more specifically, known ladies' man Kirk Douglas. Okay, but what does Spartacus himself have to say about this? Well, at this time, Kirk Douglas was a name circulating in the papers in relation to the note. When learning of the note, its mention of the name Kirk, and his links to it, he called police and denied ever knowing who Jean was. This turned out to not be entirely true, as in an interview with the head of investigation, he admitted to knowing her but never meeting her outside of production. To get ahead of the story, in a public statement, Douglas said, "I told Detective Chief Thad Brown that I didn't remember the girl or the name until a friend recalled it was she who worked as an extra in a scene with me in my picture Young Man with a Horn. Then, I recalled that she was a tall girl in a green dress. I talked and kidded with her a bit on the set, but I never saw her before or after that, and have never been out with her." He also provided an alibi. Obviously, as a rising star, Douglas wanted to stay as far from this as possible. But still, either through his own doing or by sheer coincidence, Douglas's name will forever be linked to that of Jean Spangler's. And we're still not done with him yet. There's a bit I haven't mentioned yet. You see, according to Jean's friends, at the time of her disappearance, she was 3 months pregnant and contemplating getting an abortion. The newspapers really ran with this theory and quickly linked Douglas to it. An abortion would surely explain the ambiguous line of meeting with Dr. Scott while Mother is away. Remember, at this time, abortion was illegal, and according to the patrons of the nightclubs and bars Jean frequented, there was just the guy for the job. Apparently, there were rumors of a former medical student, creepily nicknamed Doc. This Doc would illegally perform abortions for a fee. Jean may have gone to see this Doc, but the operation somehow went wrong, and Jean died as a result. This guy's identity, or even just his existence, would never be verified, and the trail seemingly ends there, but this still remains a popular theory. So in summary, this theory goes that Jean died of a botched abortion. According to friends, it was apparently known that Jean was 3 months pregnant and seeking to abort it. Furthermore, this child belonged to someone named Kirk, and the popular choice is it was Kirk Douglas's love child. On the surface, this seems very plausible. It would explain why she lied about where she was going that night, why the note ambiguously mentions visiting a doctor, why she wanted her mother out of town for it, and it coincides with her friends saying she was pregnant and seeing someone she wasn't serious with. And also the mention of Kirk and the ties to Kirk in her life, it seems kinda off. But still, this entire theory is based on one ambiguous note and recalled accounts from her family and friends, and while there's not much reason to doubt their claims, it's still just not enough evidence to really prove this theory. The theory also doesn't explain the purse. Why was it there? Why did it seem to be snatched from her? Was it placed there after the fact? If so, why was the note not taken? The botched abortion theory isn't the only theory as to what happened to Jean Spangler that night. In fact, there was another theory that police thought was much more plausible and focused much more attention to. In short, she was killed by LA gangsters, because 1940s. Now, when I said earlier that Jean was a party girl, that turned out to be very much true. It was discovered that she frequented the many bars in the city and was said to have relationships with many men, some of which were very dangerous. Police believed that Jean had been involved with gangsters that frequented the same LA club scene she had. One such gangster was Thomas Ellery Evans. An opium dealer and bodyguard, Evans had recently been arrested for robbery. But what's really puzzling was that he was also connected to another mysterious unsolved disappearance just months prior. This case's details are eerily similar to that of Jean Spangler's. This case involves a widow from Bel Air named Mimi Boomhauer. What a name! After her husband's death, the Merry Widow, as she came to be known, was a lively socialite in the same club scene as Jean. Also, similar to Jean, she apparently associated with gangsters in these establishments. She went missing in August 1949, just a couple months before Jean. Just as Jean's purse had been found days later, so had Boomhauer's pocketbook been found just days later in a supermarket phone booth. Once more, like Jean's purse, a note was found inside. This one read, "Police Department, we found this at a beach Thursday night." This case too would go unsolved. The ties that these gangsters apparently had were extremely deep, running to notorious mob bosses all the way to the Californian government. It wasn't uncommon for movie extras trying to break out to be associated with gangsters in attempts to find success. Big-name actors, aspiring actors, and gangsters all frequented the same establishments. Jean was no exception and even frequented some of the same places the Black Dahlia herself, Elizabeth Short. Jean was also one of the Florentine Gardens dancers, a spot owned by a mobster. Her work there put her in connection with some notorious names, and she hoped this would pay off for her in her career. Through their interrogation of Evans, police were able to find information regarding Jean's relationship with another known gangster, Little Davy Ogle. Ogle had disappeared 2 days after Jean. It's unclear what exactly their relationship was, but one theory is it involved a blackmail business of sorts. According to this idea, Jean was a badger girl. She would sleep with famous men, and subsequently, Ogle would blackmail them. Police didn't believe that Ogle's disappearance 2 days after Jean's was a mere coincidence. Soon attention shifted focus to the rival crime syndicate. One theory goes that Jean was just an unfortunate casualty in mob warfare. Ogle had actually been the target, and Jean was just in the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong people. She was collateral damage, and the note had been left to draw away suspicion and throw off cops. Another theory is that she actually did carry Kirk Douglas's child. Ogle or his boss may have become angry that Douglas had impregnated one of his girls, and resulted in a feud of sorts between the two parties. Douglas or his agent then had both Ogle and Jean Spangler taken out via the rival crime organization. Though this one seems less likely and doesn't explain the presence of the note. Either way, it would seem that Jean Spangler's involvement with the wrong people was her undoing. Unfortunately, at this time, being an extra looking to break out was a difficult and dangerous thing to do. In many cases, it involved being mixed up with dangerous gangsters and having to get a bit dirty. You see, Hollywood and organized crime were almost two sides of the same coin. Jean Spangler may have just been another young and beautiful aspiring actress whose situation was taken advantage of and ended up costing her her life. There's a couple other theories worth mentioning. One early theory, but one that seems to have been debunked, is that she was killed by the same murderer that killed Elizabeth Short, otherwise known as the Black Dahlia, a gruesome murder that occurred just a couple years prior. And while the tragic demise of two LA hopeful movie stars seems similar, there isn't much to connect the two, and the police quickly dismissed the idea. Another theory alleges that Jean's ex-husband Dexter Benner had either murdered her or had her killed. There isn't much to support this, but upon gaining custody of their daughter, Christine, he refused to allow her grandmother, Jean's mother, to visit the child. A court battle followed that allowed for her to visit, but Benner kept denying it and was ordered to serve 15 days in jail. Instead, he took Christine and the two fled California for Florida. Unfortunately, no theory has been able to definitively tell us what happened to Jean Spangler. Did she die of a botched abortion after becoming pregnant by one of the industry's rising stars? Was she mixed up with the wrong people, gangsters that she ended up being a victim to? Maybe it's both, maybe it's neither, maybe it's something else entirely. The case remains open but has gone cold throughout the decades. We'll likely never know what happened to Jean Spangler that night. But at only 26 years old, the curtain was dropped too soon on her life. In what can only be seen as a cruel twist of fate, Jean's name will forever be remembered, more so than many successful actresses, just not the way one would have imagined. So with that, let me know in the comments which theory you found most believable, or if you have any theories of your own. Please remember to subscribe to the channel for more content and to like and share the video. Thanks for watching.